The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is known as the world's biggest oil exporter and one of the richest countries. But throughout all these years, many have failed to recognize its downfall. Yes, you heard it right. Saudi Arabia is moving toward a great tragedy that will collapse the country's economy. So, like many countries in the region before it, it is on the brink of a perfect storm of interconnected challenges that, if history is anything to judge by, will be the monarchy's undoing well within the next decade. But what are these challenges, and how will they become the reason for Saudi Arabia's inevitable doom? Let's find out. In the current era, Saudi Arabia looks like a well-off country with all the riches in the world. However, behind all these lavish and extravagant buildings, lifestyles, and megaprojects, there is a dark truth ready to turn everything upside down. So, let's take a look at some of the challenges that will ruin Saudi Arabia and its economy. The biggest elephant in the room is oil. Of course, the main source of income for Saudi Arabia is oil exports. Saudi Arabia has maintained production at record levels for the past few years, which has kept oil prices low, undermined rival oil producers around the world who cannot afford to continue in business at such low profit margins, and paved the road for Saudi petro-dominance. Saudi Arabia's ability to pump wildly is still limited, though. According to a recent peer-reviewed study published in the Journal of Petroleum Science and Engineering, Saudi Arabia's oil production will peak in 2028, just 13 years from now, and then commence an unstoppable drop. This may significantly understate the severity of the issue. According to export land model ELM, created by Texas petroleum geologist Jeffrey J. Brown and Dr. Sam Foucher, the key issue is not oil production alone, but the capacity to translate production into exports against rising rates of domestic consumption. The inflection points, according to Brown and Foucher, are when an oil producer is no longer able to raise the volume of oil sales overseas due to the requirements to satisfy rising domestic energy demand. They discovered in 2008 that Saudi Arabia's net oil exports had started to decline as early as 2006. They predicted that this pattern would persist, and they were accurate too. Saudi Arabia's net exports declined at an average annual rate of 1.4% from 2005 to 2015, which was within the range projected by Brown and Foucher. However, recent research by Citigroup forecasted that net exports will vanish entirely during the following 15 years. This indicates that Saudi Arabia's national revenues, which are primarily derived from the sale of oil, are inexorably declining. Saudi Arabia is the largest energy consumer in the region, and domestic demand for the oil has grown by 7.5% over the past 5 years, mostly due to population growth. As a result, it is predicted that Saudi Arabia's overall population will increase to 37 million by 2030. The Saudi Arabian government's ability to export oil is therefore anticipated to be further limited during the coming 10 years, as population growth consumes the country's energy output. Now, in order to cope with the increasing domestic demands, Saudi Arabia tried to invest in renewable energy as one way to wean domestic demand off its reliance on oil, in the hopes that doing so will free up capacity for oil sales abroad, sustaining earnings. The kingdom's financial struggles, however, became apparent earlier this year when it announced an 8-year delay to its $109 billion solar initiative, which was intended to supply a third of the country's electricity by 2032. Adding to this, the indirect effects of the kingdom's own short-sighted efforts to undercut rival oil producers have also affected state revenues. Saudi Arabia, as previously reported, has maintained high production levels specifically to keep the price of oil low globally, making new endeavors unattractive for competitors like the U.S. shale sector and other OPEC producers. The notion was that the kingdom's vast financial reserves would allow it to weather the storm until its competitors are forced out of the market, unable to cope with the protracted lack of profitability. But the Saudi treasury has not escaped the fallout from the resultant oil profit crunch. In the meantime, Saudi Arabia's considerable reserves are being depleted at unprecedented levels, dropping from their August 2014 peak of $737 billion to as low as $200 billion. So, to make up for this prospect, King Salman's approach has been to accelerate borrowing. But what happens when over the next few years reserves deplete, debt increases, while oil revenues remain strained? Well, luxurious household subsidies will be one of the first expenses to be cut in hard times, just like in autocratic governments like Egypt, Syria, and Yemen, all of which are experiencing varying degrees of domestic turmoil. The successive subsidy cuts made in the former nations in response to the effects of skyrocketing food and oil prices fed right into the resentments that led to the Arab Spring upheavals. Similarly, since energy subsidies alone account for roughly a fifth of Saudi Arabia's gross domestic product, the oil wealth of Saudi Arabia and its exceptional capacity to sustain generous subsidies for oil, housing, food, and other customer goods play a significant role in reducing the risk of civil upheaval. Hence, as revenues become more limited, the kingdom's ability to maintain control over the growing domestic destin will deteriorate, as has already happened in nations throughout the region. On top of this, it is predicted that climate change would exacerbate the nation's economic issues, particularly those involving food and water. Saudi Arabia is also already seeing the effects of climate change, which include stronger increasing temperatures in the interior and significant areas of rainfall shortage in the north, like many other nations in the region. By 2040, it is predicted that the average temperatures would be higher than the global average and may rise up to 4 degrees Celsius, while rain deficits may intensify. This would be followed by additional extreme weather occurrences, including the floods in Jeddah in 2010, brought on by a year's worth of rain falling in a matter of just a few hours. Combining the two could have a significant influence on agricultural production, which is already challenged by overgrazing and industrial agriculture techniques that hasten desertification. In any case, 80% of Saudi Arabia's food needs are met by imports that are significantly subsidized. So without the protection of such subsidies, the country would be severely harmed by changing its price for food around the world. According to a 2010 report by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, Saudi Arabia is particularly vulnerable to climate change, as most of its ecosystems are sensitive. Its renewable water resources are limited, and its economy remains highly dependent on fossil fuel exports, while significant demographic pressures continue to affect the government's ability to provide for the needs of its population. With 98 cubic meters of water per person per year, the nation has some of the least water resources in the world. The majority of water withdrawal comes from groundwater, which is non-renewable in 57% of cases and used 88% for agriculture. Moreover, desalination facilities provide around 70% of the domestic water needs of the kingdom. However, desalination uses a lot of energy, making up more than half of domestic oil use. The kingdom's ability to use desalination to meet its water needs will decline as oil exports decline along with state earnings and civilian usage rises. Now, looking back in time, civil unrest and full-scale conflict can be linked to the disastrous effects of falling state power in the setting of climate-induced droughts, declining agricultural output, and accelerating oil depletion. Examples of these countries are Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and Egypt. The Saudi government, however, has made the absurd decision to export war in the region, rather than wait for the fight to return home in an effort to maintain its geopolitical hegemony and petro-dominance rather than learn from the hubris of its neighbors. Sadly, these actions are a sign of the basic misconception that has kept all of these regimes from acting rationally in the face of the crisis of civilization that is tearing the world apart around them. The misconception is based on a firm, fundamentalist belief that continuing business as usual would address the issue it has caused. Hence, like many of its neighbors, Saudi Arabia is undoubtedly on the verge of prolonged state failure, a process that is expected to get started in the coming years and become blatantly visible well within a decade. Unfortunately, those few members of the royal family who think they can save their kingdom from its inevitable demise by a bit of experimental regime rotation are no less deluded than those they seek to remove. What are your thoughts on Saudi Arabia's doom? Do you think it can be saved by any means? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more valuable content like this. Hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Thank you for watching.